the curse that never left. How the ANC still crushes those who refuse the revolution. Make way for the revolution or be crushed by it. It was not just a slogan whispered in the 1950s during the communist takeover of the ANC. It became the ruling spirit of the party. And today, long after apartheid, long after freedom, it still haunts South Africa. Dr. James Moroka was the first casualty. A Christian, a healer, a dignified African patriot, humiliated and pushed out by the rising Marxist wing simply because he refused to support violence. But the hammer didn't stop there. Today, that same ideological hammer swings mercilessly at anyone who dares to stand outside the party's control. Independent journalists are smeared, censored, or threatened. Black business people who refuse to be politically connected are sidelined or sabotaged. Farmers, especially white farmers, are treated not as fellow South Africans, but as class enemies to be targeted. Churches that preach truth are ignored or mocked. Sober black minds who speak out are accused of being coconuts or sellouts. The ANC still acts as if South Africa is in a permanent revolution, and anyone not wearing the right colors must be crushed. This is why the country is collapsing. You cannot fix what you treat as an enemy. You cannot uplift a nation when you are always at war with your own citizens. You cannot build when your first instinct is to punish the independent mind. The revolution is over. But the crushing continues. And it is not just sad. It is tragic. A liberation movement that once bowed before God in Bloemfontein now bows only to power. A movement that once prayed for rain now rains down destruction on its own people. History will ask, why did the ANC defeat apartheid, only to become tyrants in democratic clothing? But how did all this happen? Let us take you through history. You never know it existed because they revised and changed it for you.
Chapter 7. The fire that gathered and mapped out a union to serve their image of civilization. A different kind of Congress was already in the making. A Congress born not in marble halls or foreign palaces, but in churches, classrooms, print shops, and the restless hearts of the forgotten majority. These men were not generals. They were teachers, preachers, journalists, lawyers, translators, thinkers. Chapter 8. The entrance of Nelson Mandela. Interrupted convergence. When the wildcat swung. By the late 1940s, two forces were evolving, slowly, clumsily, but not without promise. On one side, Afrikanerdom was shedding its old fear of British domination and solidifying its grip on power. After decades of trauma, from the scorched earth of the Anglo-Boer War to the humiliation of the British flag waving over Pretoria, the Afrikaner was no longer just surviving. He was building schools, banks, newspapers, political machines, a language, an economy, a nation. All of it slowly rising from the ashes of 1902. On the other side, the ANC was also maturing. From a gathering of intellectuals and chiefs in Bloemfontein, it had grown into a platform of dignity, a place for dialogue, negotiation, petitions, and principle. Leaders like Dr. A.B. Zuma and Dr. James Moroka believed in engagement, not anarchy. They had no illusions about white power, but they still believed that justice could be reasoned with. These were men of wisdom and wits, not sabers. They petitioned the crown. They wrote letters instead of lighting fires. Their strength was moral, not militant. Calm and collected. Men of character. There was underneath all the noise a slow convergence happening. Painfully slow but natural. Afrikaner nationalism and African nationalism were beginning to walk the same road, even if on opposite pavements. Then came the wild swing, the wildcat called Nelson Mandela. I called him cancer and a demon. I will tell you the reasons why, by and by. Just be patient and do not boil. At the tail end of the 1940s, a young, impatient, confident man entered the scene. His name was Nelson Mandela. He did not come with a voice of prayer or a pen of protest. He came swinging, like a wild cat in a delicate room of dialogue. But let us speak the truth. Nelson Mandela interrupted the evolution of the ANC. He brought with him a new militancy, shaped not by the humble wisdom of Moroka or Rubusana, but by Marxist fire and communist doctrine. He aligned with global revolutionaries, who did not understand South Africa's long, complex threads of negotiation and nuance. He saw slow progress as betrayal. He preferred agitation to argument, the fall of Morocco, and the rise of fire. In 1952, at the height of the Defiance Campaign, Mandela accused the old wise man Dr. James Moroka, then president of the ANC, of cowardice and weakness. Moroka, a Christian, doctor and a man of deep humility, had pleaded for moderation. He had warned of chaos and called for calm mind and wisdom. For that, he was humiliated by communist-controlled Nelson Mandela, pushed aside and cast out by the very movement he had led. His dignity meant nothing. He was pushed from his chair by Nelson Mandela and fell on the ground in sorrow and shame, and communist-controlled Nelson Mandela laughed and proclaimed victory over the old wise man. He pushed him down from the chair. The Congress was no longer a gathering of elders and educators. It was becoming a battleground. Mandela, with his comrades in the ANC Youth League, redirected the river, and it has flowed that way ever since. Today, the marks remain. The ANC, once rooted in Christian values, African customs, and constitutional reasoning, was infiltrated by communist ideology, foreign slogans, clenched fists, and militant posturing. Even today, the party's internal contradictions echo from that pivot. He broke the line of the founding fathers. He broke away from African values, African ways of seeing things, and fell to the spell of communism. Became he a cancer and a demon. Communism is destructive, not constructive. While these African leaders were evolving in natural evolution, the communist-controlled Nelson Mandela was devolution, the very opposite of Africanism, wild and wired to communism, a foreign ideology that he imposed on African values of wisdom, humility, and calmness in the midst of storms and frustrations. He abandoned their method, their patience, their belief in persuasion over revolution. History demands we speak both grace and grit. This is not an attack. It is a reckoning. Mandela was many things: necessary, magnetic, courageous. But he was not a continuation of Makato, John Dewey, or Sol Plaatje, Pixley Kasemi. He was oid. He soared. Tares not wheat. He broke the harmony and the gradual evolution of South Africa, and history must be brave enough to hold both truths. That a legend rose, and in doing so silenced a lineage of dialogue and wisdom that was already building and mellowing to something real. We must learn from that, not in bitterness, but in balance.
Communism has got nothing in common with African values of growth and patience. Communism seeks to destroy what is there. African values and traditions are predisposed in the natural order of things that change by evolution. African values are steeped in spirituality. Everyone knows that communism is a godless monstrosity. African values respect and nurture the idea of a family. Communism sees the family as the enemy, for it seeks control of the people. To have a family and parents in control of their children is against the social engineering that lies at the root and heart of communism, where people, in particular the youth, must be controlled and shaped by communist ideology. African values appreciates the spirit of individual liberty, spirit of enterprise and individual creativity. Communism is about equality and collectivization. So Nelson Mandela abandoned African Christian values and got baptized into the religion of godless communism. That is what it is. He literally and openly denounced African Christian values, and according to his words, went on a path in the moral life. This is what he said himself. He divorced his wife Evelyn because she was a Christian. That is exactly what Mandela says in his Long Walk to Freedom book. The ANC was founded by men and women of Christian faith. There was no communism in the midst of the ANC. The ANC was founded in 1912 in Bloemfontein by Christians. The event opened up with prayer not a manla. They were gospel songs in the midst of the speeches. The atmosphere was of calm, wisdom, and prayer, not fiery rhetoric. And that continued for 3 decades until that Nelson Mandela appeared and crushed the spirit. Drunk with a fiery communist spirit was destruction. Nelson Mandela set himself diametrically opposed to those who built the ANC, those who came ahead of him. He became a pupil and student of communists like Joe Slovo, and was like a puppet used by these communists to enter into the realm of Africans' worldview and tear down African values and replace with communism. And that is where we are now. That is where South Africa is now, ruled and governed by communist ANC. Certainly, let me repeat, communism has absolutely nothing in common with the core of African values. Where African tradition teaches growth, patience, respect for the spiritual order, and evolution through wisdom. Communism charges in like a wrecking ball. Its very essence is destruction. Communism does not build. It dismantles. It does not nurture. It seizes and controls. African values are rooted in spiritual consciousness. They honor family. They uphold the dignity of the household, the sacred role of parents, elders, and community. In contrast, communism views the family as an obstacle to the totalitarian grip it seeks. It aims to control the soul of the youth, reshape them through ideological manipulation, and erase the inherited wisdom of their traditions. African culture celebrates initiative, enterprise, and the sacred duty of personal responsibility. Communism suffocates all of this under the tyranny of equality through enforced collectivization. Let it be known, Nelson Mandela turned his back on African Christian values. He did not walk the path of our forefathers. He denounced the morality of his upbringing and publicly confessed to adopting what he called an immoral life. These are his own words in Long Walk to Freedom. He left his wife Evelyn because she was a devout Christian. That is a fact. That is truth. And that is the path he chose. The African National Congress was not born of Marxist fire. It was born of Christian faith and African dignity. Founded in 1912 in Bloemfontein, the ANC's birth was wrapped in gospel hymns, prayer, and wise deliberation, not in militant slogans or ideological warfare. For 3 decades, the ANC was a place of spiritual resolve, moral clarity, and unity in vision. Then came Mandela, and everything changed. Drunk on the doctrine of destruction, Mandela did not continue the legacy of the founders. He betrayed it. Under the influence of communists like Joe Slovo, he became a vessel, a carrier of foreign ideologies designed to tear down our African spiritual worldview. He was no longer walking in the steps of the founders. He was marching to the drumbeat of Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. And with him came the slow death of African values in South African governance. This is why today, South Africa is ruled by a godless, spiritually disconnected ANC. An ANC that pretends to speak for the people but has long abandoned the soul of its founders. This is not progress. This is not freedom. This is cultural suicide. It's time to say it plainly. Communism is not African. It is an imported monstrosity. It is anti-family, anti-spiritual, anti-freedom. And those who led us into its arms turned their backs on the soul of Africa.